Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Laddie MP8. With me is Christy McFarlane. She's going to keep me right, make sure I say all the right things. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Adam Hannett, the head distiller, and we're going to talk through, hopefully you've all got your samples in front of you, we're going to talk through and taste through 3 Port Charlotte single casks, which is going to be quite interesting. I've watched some of the reviews some of you guys have done online already, so I've got some notes, so thank you for doing that.
You didn't have to write your own anyway.
No, I didn't. I just watched what everyone else had done, so yeah, so thank you. No, so it's quite good to be able to taste them, to be able to talk through what we do. And the idea with the MP8 kind of series is that we can really kind of focus on, you know, the details, you know, the provenance, the barley, the cask, the maturation, all that kind of stuff. So quite interesting, and a few other things to talk about as well. Of course, we really want this to be kind of interactive, so you know, questions, all that kind of stuff, fire them in. We'll do our best to answer them. I'll let Christy answer most of them.
Great, thanks. You're going to throw me in at the deep end.
Absolutely.
First live
Absolutely.
tasting.
This is the first one?
Yeah, I was so nervous before the live feed that I sent a WhatsApp to the CEO with a little kiss on the end. So I'll be sacked on Monday.
Yeah, first and last one.
Whoops.
Yeah. Good, so I think, yeah, hopefully we'll have some fun tonight. It's going to be very open, lots of stuff to talk about. So, yeah, so let's get stuck in with the dram. You'll notice that we have 3 bottles. We have 4. You know, it's been a while since we've done this.
Yeah, we had to get all our fingers out to count the right glass there.
Exactly. Yeah, I got that one wrong. But we've, well, actually, just as I mentioned there, we haven't done the MP series for a live broadcast for a while. The MP8 series, we kind of bottled them at the beginning of 2018 with a view to do them pretty soon after. And unfortunately, you know, well, Carl Reevy, who was the head of communications, he passed away at the beginning of 2018. So we weren't going to be rushing into doing any of this kind of stuff when after we just lost Carl. So yeah, so that's why we haven't done this for a while, and we'll dedicate this to Carl, as his memory, and hopefully we'll.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be worthy.
Yeah, exactly, and we'll manage to hold back the emotions. So, yeah, any instructions for this evening, Christy? Anything we need to think about?
Just that if you're joining in from home, maybe go onto the Twitter page if you want to ask any questions or add any taste notes, opinions on things. We've got our lovely comms department to my right, so we've got Jane Carswell, who's covering off some of the comments, and we've got Robert McEachern, who we'll try to keep under control for the evening.
Got a microphone.
He does have a microphone, so we're all on tenterhooks for that.
Absolutely. So if you do hear any swearing, it was, yeah, we do apologise in advance for that.
And if you can join in using the hashtag MP8 and hashtag WeAreIsla.
There you go. So now you have your instructions, so we know what we're doing. So the MP8 is, of course, Port Charlotte liquid. So the reason we have 4 drams in front of us, we're going to start with a little Port Charlotte 10-year-old to settle our nerves, is one reason. But really just so we can focus, we can talk about Port Charlotte. You know, last year we've relaunched the range. We've given Port Charlotte, you know, a kind of a fresh perspective, given it its own focus, I think, which is really, really cool. Some new whiskies, we obviously have the 10-year-old as our core product, you know, Islay barley's Cask special, some really, really kind of really innovative, really cool stuff that's coming out, and you know, the future of what we have with Port Charlotte is really, really exciting. So we're going to kick off with the Port Charlotte 10. So if anyone's sitting at home and they don't have one, we're going to wait, 5-10 minutes so you can nip down to the off license, get a bottle, run back home and open it with us. So talk amongst yourselves while we do that. But no, we're just going to have a little dram with the 10-year-old just to kind of get our taste buds zoned in.
It's a good opportunity for anyone who missed out on the kits as well to join us with something
absolutely.
that they might be able to get at home, or you can pop out and get one afterwards.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, great place to start, the Port Charlotte 10. To be honest, of all the whiskies we make, this has got a real soft spot. I've got a real soft spot for this one, and I tend to find myself most Fridays when I finish work and go home and get the kids to bed, I have one. So, you know, in tradition, we'll have another one just now. But, you know, noticing that it's beautiful, it's soft, it's sweet, it's really, really fresh. You get that marine tang, and the peat's really, really not the big player there, which is lovely. So what we'll find with Port Charlotte, 40 ppm, heavily peated whiskey, the peat smoke is always kind of held in check by the other, like the balance in the whiskey, the other flavours that come through. So, slange it.
Cheers.
Start already.
I have. I'm sorry. I can't sit with whiskey in front of me and not drink it.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I talk too much and forget to drink.
Sounds counterproductive to what you're supposed to be doing with it.
Very true. Very true. Well, but beautiful flavour there.
So what's the cask profile on this?
So this is predominantly first fill bourbon casks. So about 65% will be fresh bourbon casks. A few second fill bourbon casks in there as well. Just let the spirit come through a bit more. And then about 25% will be second fill wine casks, which is really, really interesting. And over the years we've been working with wine casks, I found that the second time you fill, you get a lot more oak and a little less from the wine, and you get this lovely balance. It's a really, really interesting kind of dynamic. So that second fill is really, really important.
Lovely.
But yeah, so that's the 10-year-old. Warmed up. That's like doing our stretches.
Yeah.
You know, like before we really get into the rest of the whiskey. So. Yeah, we'll start talking about some of the whiskies here. If you want to pour the first one, we're going to start with the cask number 1860, which is the 2011 in first fill bourbon. So, Christy, if I may.
Thank you very much.
So this is a really interesting cask because it's, it was bottled obviously 2018. So 6 years old, and as I kind of mentioned with the MP tastings, this isn't. I'm not, bottling, perfect whiskies that are ready. That they're a kind of moment in time. It's a work in progress. It's a point of discussion. So it's quite interesting. It's not something we would normally bottle. That's not the idea of the MP series. It's about discussion. So we can really see at this stage of maturation, how that spirit's developing, where the peat profile is, the whole kind of story, where it's matured, how that affects it. The harvest as we listen to the tractors zipping by. It's a nice day on Islay, so the combine harvesters have been out.
Yeah, I get stuck behind them most of the time.
Yeah.
When we're driving to work, straw bales.
They're usually going pretty fast though.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. Yeah. Not too bad for the day.
So yeah, and the great thing about this is, again, these are all Islay, Port Charlotte. So all the barley for this was grown on the island for the first one here in 2010, and for the next two in 2007. And the barley was grown on the island. And that's a really special thing for us, to be making whiskey with Islay barley here. It's kind of central to what we do. So,
yeah, quite special to see it go from growing in a field where it's right close to the distillery, and seeing the excitement at this time of year as people bring it in. And actually, it goes away again to go malting to Beards and Inverness. But when it comes back and it's bottled here, it's kind of like you've seen it from almost the whole way through the process. It's quite interesting, isn't it?
It really is. I think it's. When you're making whiskey, to have that provenance of where that whiskey's made, I think that's really interesting. If I look out my office window, I look across the fields where Ian McKell's growing barley, and you can see it as the year goes on, as it goes from kind of green to nice kind of golden colour, and then when you see the bales in the field. So it's nice to be able to have that really close connection to it.
Yeah, it's a bit bizarre. It's something that, like, having grown up in the island, I don't know if you noticed it, but I've worked in the industry before, and I've never felt this kind of connection to barley in agriculture before, where you do actually look across the loch and you see the different changing colours in the season, and it does kind of connect you to nature a little bit as well. It does,
absolutely, yeah. And I think that's a lovely thing. It's that connection, it's that cycle, and year upon year, it happens, and watching when it happens and how the weather. You're really focusing on the weather.
You more than most. Please let it rain.
This is the thing. It's this balance of at the beginning of the through the summer when it's quite warm and you're really wanting rain to keep production going. Yeah. You're praying for rain, and then at this time of year you're praying for no rain so the combines can get into the field. It's a really interesting thing because, I suppose when you think about it, kind of practically, the distillation this year, half of it will be from barley grown in Islay. So in 2018 we had a really good year, and that makes up half of our production this year. If we have a bad year this year, it really kind of fluctuates or can have a big impact on our production level. So
yeah,
interesting.
But it's mainly the rain you worry about, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. Yeah, there's never enough rain during the summer.
You let the farmers worry about the rain for the barley, and you'll
absolutely
worry about the production after.
Absolutely. So I suppose as we talk about barley and all these things, I think the great thing about this is this connection to Islay. It's really what at the distillery we're all about, but specifically with Port Charlotte, we really want to focus on what makes an Islay whiskey, how we think about that. So so there's one of the reasons why we selected three Islay barleys for this, because Port Charlotte is we are Islay. This is about what we do at this distillery, and we can talk more about that. That can kind of be the theme of what we talk about. I think.
Oh, you've given it all away already.
I know.
May as well finish now.
Well, that's it. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
Cheers.
No, let's focus in on this dram then, and have a little nose, have a little look at it. I did have a little look for some tasting notes, so I'll start with some of them.
Nice.
So, yeah, on the nose, and again, these are bottled at cask strength, so the strength on this one is 61.4%, so still really, really strong. It's natural, just from the cask, literally into the bottle. There's no dilution or anything taking place there. So 61.4, and you can pick that up. You get that that kind of prickle, that kind of heat, the alcohol there, of course. Yeah. It's not at all aggressive, I must say that. It's really floral. It's quite light. It's gentle. And there's a note. If you leave this to open for kind of 10 minutes or so, you'll start to get a really lovely peach note coming through.
I almost forgot it was peated there. Oh yeah, that's peated. Do I even work here?
That's the interesting thing, though. The peat there isn't the most dominant thing.
Yeah, you don't get it so much in the nose.
Not at all.
Kind of a bit more of a reminder on the palate.
Absolutely. Yeah, really soft. You get that honey. It's kind of just starting to come now. You get that peat. It's kind of an ashy, dry peat. And then we have a taste.
Sorry, I raced ahead. Again, counterproductive to have it in front of me.
Totally fine. It's what it's here for, isn't it? But again, you can feel that heat. You feel it's got that presence on the palate, but there's nothing aggressive there again. It's just that heat from the high strength. You get the peat on the palate for sure. Yeah.
How would you say that obviously we work a lot with barley and with quite what some might call a younger whisky, to get more of those barley notes through. How do you think that works with the smoky peat of Port Charlotte and the cereal notes for the barley?
I think it works really nicely, and like you say, the cereal notes, you really get that lovely kind of porridgey kind of barley note, that malted barley coming through there. I think it works really, really nicely because that sweetness and that smoke are a nice kind of contrast to each other. Smoke's almost a little bit bitter, it's dry, and you get that lovely sweetness. It's a lovely balance there. And when we're distilling at Bruichladdich, we're always going to get a floral, quite light spirit. And to have the peat smoke sitting in there, it's not medicinal, it's not oily, it's dry. To get that cereal, to get that fruit. I mean, again, that's why we're bottling young, so we get the influence of the cereal. And that's why, we're talking about really what we've got here. The variety of barley, whether it's Optic on on Oxbridge Republican on this one, Optic or Oxbridge. We want to really focus on that and understand how that flavour comes through, how that works with the peat. Most people say you don't really have to worry about the barley because you're going to peat it. But how does the peat and the barley add up to the flavour? It's not just about the peat dominating everything else.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me because I want to bring it totally back to Bruichladdich and what we've got in the Bruichladdich range, but I would have always said that barley variety didn't make that much of a difference until I tasted Bear. Yeah. And then Bear barley, which is the 6-row variety that we grow in Orkney, it just completely shot all of that out the water for me. So yeah, it's interesting how everything plays a part. It's certainly not 70% of the flavour comes from the cask, or certainly not when you're talking about these whiskies.
And there you go. There's a perfect example. Another reason of why we're doing this and tasting this, because people assume, again, like that 70% it comes from the cask. 25% of statistics are just made up on the spot. So.
Oh, I thought it was 80.
It is now 80. But it's interesting. How could you everything whiskey is so complex and so, it's a product of so many different factors that you can't just put it down to the cask. You can't just put it down to these things. So we've got to think about the barley. We've got to think about, that harvest, that vintage, and being able to taste these whiskies. You really get to do that. You really get to focus on the stage of maturation we're at. At the stage of bottling.
To be a bit provocative, because I'm always a bit provocative. Do you think that might be a myth that is spread by an industry that wants you to think that barley doesn't make a difference?
Absolutely. I absolutely do. I mean,
leading question, one I thought of earlier.
So the barley makes a huge difference, and we've doing these tastings. We talk about this kind of thing all the time, where it's regional trials, bare barley, organic. Everything we're doing with barley exploration, we're seeing a difference in flavour. you know, the vintage is again different, so that even if we're tasting Islay barley and Bear barley and organic, for
Yeah.
those three, if we taste them, they're all different. You know, even if you take the Bear barley and go back vintage to vintage, you know,
Yeah.
you'll get a difference there as well. So we're
Yeah.
exploring literally everything and finding that there's a difference of flavour, you know, and it's only time will tell to when we get onto this.
Yeah, it's quite nuanced. It's quite esoteric, isn't it? It's not necessarily something that everyone's going to sit down like we are and enjoy of an evening, but certainly something that keeps us excited and
For sure. Well,
keeps it part of the project of why you want to work here and why you want to explore.
for sure. I mean, just to come back to your question there, like we've got to explore what it is we're actually doing. You know, if we just thought it doesn't make any difference and just kept distilling barley and didn't care where it came from, you know, we're not doing justice to this craft and this history of distillation we have here. So for us, it's really the focus on barley, on exploration. That's why we do things like this, you know, so we can really get to the bottom of it and discuss.
It's actually quite an interesting point that, you know, we always talk about it, I think, almost selfishly. Like, for us, it's a project that keeps us going. I think Dave Broom wrote an article quite recently on scotchwhisky.com about how, you know, people at home actually have to want it. Like, when you're talking about terroir, people actually have to want to drive that forward and think that it matters. Yeah. At least I hope that's what he was talking about.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the conversation there has got to be, you know, it's maybe not for everyone. And as we're doing all this, you know, the really important thing is that at the end of the day, the whiskey has to be delicious.
Yeah.
You know, and that's so even if people don't want to go into the depth. Well, I think again, when you focus on the ingredients and how you make your whiskey and how you mature it, you know, that makes it better. Even if you don't buy into, you know, the fact that organic and Bear and Islay make a difference, you still enjoy the whiskey. That's important.
Yeah, it is, but it's also a testament to the people who have followed us over the years, you know, that they feel like they get it, and we're very grateful for that there are people out there who do take the time to sit down and do these kind of geeky style tastings, because otherwise we could be shouting into a tunnel with nobody listening.
Yeah, I hope
thank you at home.
I hope we're not.
Christy, well, we're on the slightly touchy subject, we'll just go in deep right at the start.
Can I make a disclaimer at the beginning? So when we started a bit of a debate last September on what makes an Islay whisky, which we'll come on to in a little minute, we had a very lively discussion online. So we had some people who were very behind us in what we did on Islay, and there were a few who were quite cynical and quite critical about what we're doing, which is brilliant. We're always open to opinion. So in a rather perhaps devised plan, we thought, why don't we invite the people who have been quite critical about what we have been doing? We sent them a kit at home and we invited them to come along and take part in the debate.
You didn't tell me that.
No, I didn't.
Right.
Just again, didn't want to be sacked, but the Monday, P45. So there might be a bit of kind of discussion going on Twitter. So
well, unsurprisingly, some of them are the first questions that's come in, which is what you would expect and what we're looking for. So Soren Krebs at OCD Whiskey, who was heavily involved in our discussion back in September, so thanks for that, Soren. I say thanks for that, Soren. So he's asking, while we're on this subject, if I've got your question right, Soren, I hope I have, shouldn't the terroir term in whiskey be more about traceability, which is extremely important, as there are too many variables within the production process and maturation period, i.e. fermentation cut, and especially the individual casks and previous occupants, to determine the original effects of the terroir once matured.
Did he get all of that in 140 characters on Twitter?
Oh, you can get 280 now. Variety, strain and barley is surely far more important for imparting any flavour.
Right. Did you get that?
So essentially, I think what you're saying is that surely the terroir term of whiskey should be more about the traceability, because when you get to through the production process, there's too many variables within that to determine the original of the effects of the terroir once the whiskey's matured.
Sure, there's so many factors involved in creating that final spirit, of course, the traceability of it's really important. I think when you think about actually the process of fermentation and distillation, that will effectively concentrate the flavour you get from your terroir, the variety of barley. So the variety of barley you plant, where you plant it, its climate as it grows, it will develop, the flavour, it will develop the grain. So when you then mash that grain and ferment it, you're working, that's developing the flavour, with the yeast. The yeast will work on that and develop specific flavours. As you then distill that, you concentrate it again. So fermentation and distillation is almost one of the best ways to express terroir. So, and that, again, absolutely after that, the maturation, the cask. But the great thing about what we're doing is we're tracking all that. We're paying attention to that and paying equal weight to it all. I think what we find is in the industry that it's a frustration for us when people will say that the barley variety doesn't matter and the terroir doesn't matter. You can use barley from wherever you like in the world. It doesn't matter. You're going to distill it. You're going to change the flavour. I mean, that's just wrong as far as I'm concerned. And what we've done in tasting spirits, at the new spirit stage before it's even in a cask, you're going to get different flavours, and absolutely, it's the traceability and understanding the variety of barley, and again, maybe not focusing in the development of barley, not focusing on how much you can yield from it, but like how that barley is suited to specific conditions, specific place, specific soil. That's where we want to go. That's why we do what we do with this. So
I think it's an interesting point, because perhaps it's because you're the head distiller and you're on the production side, and you've obviously started in the shop, you've been in the warehouse side, you've been in production, and now you're kind of overseeing a lot of it. But for me, it's a philosophy thing. So it's not just about concentrating flavours. For me, terroir was about certain principles that Mark and Simon came and brought with them from the wine world. And I think Simon's always really good about saying it's a practical way of applying terroir. Like we might not be able to trace every single thing in a single cask. We might have releases that are whole bottlings that explore single vintage, single estate, single malt. But at the same time, it was about making decisions that did put us further towards traceability and provenance, so making declarations like having 100% Scottish barley, having Islay farmers start to grow for us in 2004. So for me, if somebody says terroir, I don't necessarily think of it in the same way as wine, where you're talking about the soil and the variety and the interaction with the grape. I always think about it as the full response to your community, to the place that you're growing up and living, your connection to the seasons and weather. And for me, it's not about that tiny minute detail, although obviously with things like this it can be interpreted that way.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, it is about the philosophical side of it as well, and how you think about that. But it's almost like there's a duty of care to do things on Islay, for Islay, because we're doing it here. So that becomes part of terroir. I mean, it's such a wide-ranging kind of terminology. It can mean so many different things, to so many different people. But like you say, working the way I do with it in production, there's a practical aspect of it. And even if we weren't thinking about terroir, somebody phoning in the shop there. So.
Hello? Somebody's going to make a complaint.
If somebody's looking for a tour, they'll be in tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Okay, so I completely forgot where I was going with that. But thank you. The practical aspect of focusing on terroir and understanding the flavours is that when you're distilling, you want to understand the ingredients that you're working with. Just to have barley isn't enough. To understand where it comes from, how that shapes the flavour. Even if you didn't use the term terroir, we would still do what we do. Terroir just encompasses kind of almost the whole philosophy, the whole practical aspect of it.
For me, it's about connection. It's about the connection to nature. It's about connection to who's growing for you. It's about seeing it at the end of it, where even down to the contractors who take it away. Yeah. Actually, that might be a good opportunity to just take a step back and look at what actually makes an Islay whisky. So if we're talking about terroir and the local terroir of here, if you're talking about the whisky making process, so you start with barley growing. You then head to malting. You then mill that. It's like a quiz here. Then you've got mashing, fermentation, distillation, maturation, and bottling. This shouldn't be this difficult. I know, wow. And I only used 8 fingers. So out of that whole process, in order to be called an Islay whisky, according to the Scotch Whisky Association's regulations, 2009, I believe, all you have to do to be called an Islay whisky is to be mashed, fermented and distilled here, or something to do with converting a fermentable substrate with endogenous enzymes, something like that. So all you have to do practically is mash, ferment and distill. And you could probably do that within about a week, would you say?
I mean, within, if the time is right. I mean, your fermentation is 2 days. Within 3 or 4 days, you can have that barley in and then back off the island in a tanker.
So there's no there's no legislation to say that you have to grow barley here.
Nope.
You don't have to malt here. You don't have to mature here, and you don't have to bottle here.
Nope.
So
interesting, isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, an Islay whiskey where you have a 10-year-old whiskey and it's an Islay whiskey and it's spent 3, 4, 5 days a week of its life being made here with barley from, I mean, it could be anywhere. So it comes to Islay, it's mashed, it's fermented, it's distilled, it's filled into a tank, and it's maturing in Glasgow for the next 10 years. It's bottled, in the bottling hall right there with Glasgow tap water, whatever. That's a very, I mean, it's still be a good whiskey,
Yeah.
That's fine. But the issue is, I think that, is it an Islay whiskey?
It's a difficult one for me as a local. Again, I've grown up in Islay and I've worked in the industry for a while now, and it was something I didn't question before. And then, obviously a couple of colleagues were saying here, but we do it all on the island. Actually, I used to work for another distillery, and I always used to know when somebody had gone on a Bruichladdich tour, and then they'd come to me and they'd do another tour and they'd be like, "So do you mature all your whiskey here?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, parts of it, and then some of it on the mainland." "And do you do all your bottling here?" "Oh no, we do that in the mainland." And it didn't. I mean, to some people it's not important, and it might not ever be important for some people, but it is quite interesting to know that you can earn that Islay name that's got all this rich heritage and of whisky making in about a week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose like bottling whiskey and things like that, the process here, that would never have been done in Islay. The whiskey would always have been shipped away if it was matured here. So there's certain aspects where we've maybe at Bruichladdich over the years, our focus has been on Islay. From day one, reopening the distillery, it's been on so Mark Rainier, Simon Coughlin, the guys, who were involved in buying it, they moved from London to Islay. So it wasn't just something like a plaything where they would just, have a distillery. They moved here and they invested. But much like, like Jim McEwen, of course, an Islay man through and through. It's so important that we bottled whiskey here, that we matured the whiskey here, because that was providing jobs for people here.
Yeah.
That was about getting Bruichladdich back on its feet, about doing good things for the community, and then we've kind of extended this kind of thing. So right from the beginning, by bottling, or in 2003 when we started bottling, it was building up the Islay, the Provenance, to what it is we do.
And I suppose back at the turn of the millennium, it was more important back then because there wasn't this whisky boom that the island's seeing now. I mean, when you look at the unemployment on the island, it's scarcely there.
Mm-hmm.
People need permanent jobs. They don't. I think we're struggling a little bit where we've got the employment, but it's not necessarily permanent. It's quite seasonal. It's quite based on hospitality and tourism. But back in 2001, when you reopened the distillery, that was probably quite different. The unemployment rate was slightly higher. There wasn't the boom in single malt that we had now. So it's really, I'm sure it has turned the fate of the Rins around, having somewhere like Bruichladdich and Kilchoman for that matter
absolutely,
on the Rins.
Yeah, it definitely has. I mean, I went to school in Port Charlotte, so I was young, and we'd go past the distillery every day, and it was always a place that was kind of, you never went in. It was a factory. The gates were always shut, if it was closed or running, and it was a very different place. And now you think of what we've got now, and the fact that we'll have so many people coming in to visit. It's an open place. There's so much going on here.
Yeah.
It's the Islay spring water, it's the Islay bottling, it's Islay maturation, it's the whole thing, the Islay barley. I mean, it's really in the last, it's been quite a while since I was at primary school, but in the last 25 years, things have really changed. Maybe it's longer than that. We're not going into that. Moving swiftly on, but I think it's really important, obviously, for what we do for the community, that we don't just use the postcode to make whiskey. We're doing everything here and providing employment and providing good employment for people as well.
But that's just our opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're obviously biased.
Of course.
Which is why we invited the critics.
Yeah.
So if you do have any input or opinion on what actually makes an Islay whiskey, does it have to be matured here? Does it not? Would it have a different impact on the island if all of the Islay distilleries matured here? What is it that people are feeling at home?
Yeah. There's a couple of things on that. A couple of questions that only you can answer, Adam. So in terms of what we're doing in Islay at the moment, Jens Freymouth is one of the people who's asking, if you already know, when do you think you are going to start with the malt floors?
Interesting.
Not malt floors.
But as the question is asked.
Well, that's.
I struggled with that.
So it's a good question, Jens. Hello, by the way. The malt floors, at the moment, it's a project we want to do. We don't have definite dates of when we'll start, when we'll finish, but within 5 years, I'd like to think we'd be malting Islay barley here. So at the moment, we grow half of our kind of requirements on the island, and we then ship it 400 miles to Inverness to be malted and bring it back. We want to, from a kind of sustainability point of view, from a carbon footprint point of view, from, again, a 100% Islay point of view, we want to do that here, again, providing more employment. When we do this, the plan, what we're looking at the moment, isn't the traditional malt floor, because to do that, to malt the amount we need a huge amount of space. So, what do we do in the village? Do we just start buying it up and concreting it and, building these kind of buildings? Or do we try and have a smaller footprint where we can be more efficient? We can...
Oh, efficiency, that's not a word you hear bandied
Well,
around.
yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, though, when you have the opportunity to start from scratch. And again, this is the evolution of not just the distillery, but of the world at the moment, where we don't want to be wasteful in what it is we're doing.
You're right, from a sustainability point of view.
So yeah, when I
behind if you're not doing it.
So when I use the term efficiency, we're still not going to be kind of squeezing every last drop out of everything,
P45 for that.
Thank you. That's it. You'll be both a job market on Monday morning. But so the malted floor, the malt thing. What we'll do is kind of replicate what Baird's maltings do up in Inverness, which is the salad in box, which actually from a traceability point of view on the small batches of barley, if we're doing small batches, we're able to keep that separate everywhere. So if Hunter Jackson grows 30 tons of barley at the moment, that just gets mixed in with kind of everyone else's barley. But by malting here, we'll be able to, with the salad in box, we'll be able to really focus on the variety that Hunter grew, the tonnage that he grew, keep that separate, distill that separately. So if we just did a malt floor, we wouldn't be able to do that. If by being more efficient, if you like, we'll be able to really kind of focus on some of the things that we find really, really interesting in the distillery and be able to do it better than we currently do now. So there's a lot of kind of romantic views of malt floors and how things should be done, but I think we have to look at it across every aspect of what it is we want to achieve, and it looks like a salad in box would be better.
I've never heard of like a salad in box being a sort of a negative connotation. I know that realistically, I think, there 3 distilleries that currently malt on Islay, so it's not like it's completely widespread. It is the traditional way of doing things, but I've never heard of a salad in box being, it's not a big industrial drum.
No,
it's,
no.
as you say, small batches where we can trace stuff through. And do you think we'll be able to do Port Charlotte here, the heavily peated stuff that we've got in front of us?
Absolutely, yeah. The idea is that we'd be able to produce Proclari, Port Charlotte and Octomore here. So again, that leads us into the kind of terroir of peat, if you like, or the different flavours you'll get from peat from different regions. So I think when you look at what it is we're trying to do, the advantages across, really kind of zeroing in on the detail of what it is we do, we'll be able to get a lot more focus and a lot more depth. So I think it's a really positive thing. I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah, the peat's an interesting one, because particularly when we are, raising the sort of questions around what makes an Islay single malt. Yeah. And at the moment we are malted in Inverness, and we are using peat from the Highlands or from around Baird's malt. So to us, we haven't used much of Islay peat before. I think we've experimented with it once before, but it's something that we've kind of sacrificed almost, because I think we'd have liked to have done it here, just to get that traceability and to get that provenance and to make sure we were working with the right partner in Baird's.
For sure. Yeah.
So
I think there's an element of having to walk before you can run with what if we could, we'd be doing so many different things, we'd look at so many different aspects, but there's so much to do. And you think
we've made so little progress.
Well, I suppose you could look at it that way, but you look at the last kind of 7 years, we've doubled the amount of staff we have, we've increased production, we've done so much. There's so much work to do around the distillery. We're building warehouses, we're the products we're making, all the kind of stuff that's going on. There's so much, but our aims and our ambitions are always, pushing us forward. So we'll get there.
Yeah. No, it's not at all. Obviously, I work in PR, so I'm here to cue you up in a totally biased way. Yeah. But for me, it's always about that traceability. And Lynn, who we work with on the malt side, is always saying, like, we're trying to retrofit a Victorian distillery. So for us, if we had there's a lot of craft distillers coming online now. They can absolutely design everything perfectly to work. And I think we almost look with a bit of jealousy, like, imagine if we, had a blank canvas where we could draw it all. Yeah. But for us, we've been established in 81. We've tried really hard to kind of keep the old museum working in a way. So for us, it's about, like a jigsaw piece of trying to fit everything together so that eventually we can get round to doing everything the way that we believe is right. And like you say, it doesn't all happen at once. So.
Exactly, it takes time, and that's what whiskey is all about. It takes time, takes people, takes a lot of involvement, a lot of things. But we'll get there.
It takes folk on Twitter too.
Good.
So Alistair at Spirit and Wood says. Islay whisky as a category is well understood by the consumer at large. Questioning the definition is commendable but clearly disruptive. Might a better solution be to define a new subcategory that complements rather than conflicts? Is that what micro-provenance is?
That's a very interesting point.
Yeah, I think, to kind of touch on a little bit of that, we're not trying to be kind of disruptive and tell it, say that we're right and everyone else is wrong. That's absolutely not what we're doing here. It's just that we have an opportunity and a belief in how we want to make whiskey, and it's raising the debate because not everybody knows how whiskey is made by each distillery on Ireland, how that all fits in, and what other people do, what people don't do, what people assume, what people don't assume. And I think it's like a transparency thing. Everything we do is about being transparent, and we really want to focus and like, we don't have to talk about any of this kind of stuff, but we ourselves find it interesting. Yeah. We ourselves care about it. So the fact that we talk about having 100 employees, or 101, or 105, or how many people we have, because it seems to increase rapidly all the time. But
every time you've written something down,
we've added it, exactly. There's something changes, but it's something that we believe is important to us, and we want to talk about it. So we're not trying to be disrespectful to anyone else. And if everybody did what we did, then Islay would be ruined. Yeah. I mean, that's an important balance to the story. So.
Back to the question, I think it is a really interesting one because it almost goes to kind of marketing. It's like, okay, they understand the Islay category, but to people, Islay almost means heavily peated. It means, it's a flavour. It's not something that necessarily connects it to the island or to the community or to the place itself. And I think that's more of our point about it is, again, we're not trying to discredit anyone for doing anything a certain way. We want to bring it back to what we believe is an expression of the place that we live.
Absolutely. We live here, we know what it's like, but it's more than just a place where peated whiskey is made. Yeah. And I think, that's really important that we don't, but how does that fit Bruichladdich or Bunnahabhain? Because they're not, Bruichladdich isn't a peated whiskey, but Bunnahabhain isn't a peated whiskey. So if Islay is just a peated whiskey region, that does nothing to kind of talk about the how each distillery makes whiskey and the particular things that are important with them. So again, it's the detail, I think, and the transparency that I think we would really want to focus on.
Again, it is quite a geeky level, and don't get us wrong, if we're out in the world and like a lot of us travel with our jobs to go and present, and it's always Islay first. We always talk about Islay as a place, as a proud place where we come from, that we sing the praises of the people here. And Robert, you were saying the other day, it's every distillery on Islay does something for the community. They do employ some people, they do give back to the local community. So again, we're not trying to discredit anyone. We're just trying to say we wonder if there is a different way to have a definition. But it's an interesting one. Maybe the subcategorization is a good one.
It maybe would be, yeah. But I think it's just, for us, it's important, I think, just to talk about what it is we do. So we believe it's important. Let's talk about it. Let's be transparent. So I think, just to come back to whiskey, we've nearly finished the first dram and then got a bit distracted.
We're going to be here for hours.
I was just going to say on this dram here that this 2011, bottled at 6 years old, this would have been one of the component parts for the 2011 Port Charlotte Islay barley we released, which is now finished. So it would have played a part in that, and it would have brought that kind of fruitiness, that floral aspect. There's a lovely creaminess to it as well, which was again on the palate one thing I picked up. But because we don't want to be here having breakfast with you, so we're going to try and move on to the next whiskey, which is cask number 3403, which is a 2008 first fill bourbon cask.
Should we mention that people at home should definitely not feel restrained to wait for us to finish yabbering to have their next dram?
Yeah, people have died of thirst while I've been talking, so I would, don't wait for us. Please just dive in and enjoy the whiskies as Christy's doing right now. So, it's important that you enjoy this and don't just while we're talking about all the kind of things we're talking about. Then please feel free to enjoy the whiskey. Pour it, let it open, let it breathe a little bit.
I do have to admit, and this is just personal preference, and again, I hope you don't shoot me, but I love the fact that we bottle everything at cask strength. I think it gives it such body and viscosity, and keeping all the natural oils in there makes a huge difference. There is something almost, don't know if it's the youth, don't know if it's the strength, or just the fact that I'm a bit of a weakling, but I always enjoy an Islay barley a bit better with a bit of water in it. Yeah. But I do enjoy the fact that I'm given that choice to do it myself, and it's not completely watered down.
Absolutely. Well, you can. The great thing about as they doing these micro Provenance and indeed releasing whiskey at a higher strength is that you get an opportunity to taste it in its kind of natural form, if you like. For most of the whiskies, we will bring down to 50% because the balance of flavour, I feel will be better by doing that and by blending and tasting these three individual whiskies. As I mentioned before, they're not all complete, perfect whiskies, but that's part of what blending is. It's understanding and getting to the bottom of each whiskey and how they'll work together. But bottling it at cask strength and giving people the opportunity to taste at cask strength, it's quite a refreshing thing to do. And again, you get the choice of adding water or not is entirely up to you. And again, these whiskies, taste them first without, and then please do add water to them. We have some here. And we'll do that and talk about that as well. But
they are quite different.
Yeah. So obviously there's an age difference there.
Yep.
One is 9, one is 6. So that's going to play a part. The barley variety is different. They're both first fill bourbon, but both from different origins, which I really find plays a big difference, particularly with this one here. This, if I look through my notes.
Do you happen to know the farms for these ones, Adam? Are they?
Yeah, well, the farms is interesting because we don't actually know the farms for these specifically because of the process of making the Port Charlotte of the malting. So there's going to be a mix and match. And again, what we've done with the single farms in the past is kind of reserve them for Bruichladdich.
Yeah. Okay.
So in the early days when there was less farmers growing and less volume there, we were able to to be able to we'll state the farms and more, but a mixture of everyone. But when we were a bit smaller, you'd maybe focus on, like the 2007 Rockside or whatever it may be, or the 2004 Control as an Islay barley, and then everything else would be blended together. But the process of making or malting the Islay barley for Port Charlotte is that you heavily peat a batch, and then you figure out, you analyse it for what its ppm is, and then when you work out if it's 125 or whatever it is in the ppm, you then blend unpeated
so it's not an exact science, it's more of a blending of malt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
so that's how it's done.
So once we have our own maltings, we will be able to be a bit more traceable, where we would know the farms. And of course, in our Port Charlotte Islay barley, we do know which farms they've come from, the ones that actually makes it to the shelf.
Yeah, we do. And I think, I don't know if I actually wrote it down, but I did get a list of the farms that we, obviously the guys that grew in 2007 that made this 2008, and the guys that grew in 2010 that made this 2011. So apart from, we'll segregate the single farm. So James Brown, Octomore, his barley will be kept for Octomore, the 8.3, 7.3, 6.3. The 0.3 expression. We'll be doing single farms from, at the moment, with Island Farm, so Ian McCarroll, Sunderland Farm with Raymond Stewart. So everything else basically will go into either the Islay barley or Port Charlotte barley. So we have, again, traceability on who grew for us. But coming back to tasting this whiskey.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. So on the nose, I've skipped the dram ahead, sorry, I'll come back to number 2. So quite fruity on this one. Again, you've got that kind of nice kind of floral aspect. You get that kind of creaminess coming through on the nose. It's cereal. There's you get that maltiness, and there's a kind of a caramel aspect to it. And then I picked up again doing this earlier on. It was quite minty. You get a little menthol kind of like a green kind of edge. But again, really gentle, really fresh. The peat isn't really leaping out the glass at you there. It's still quite gentle. It's there, but it's not, again, overpowering.
I just have to shut myself up sometimes to not ask any questions.
Can I ask a question?
No.
In fact, before I ask a question, if I don't shout out to my son Callum, who's watching and commenting every 2 minutes, I'm going to get shot. So, hi Callum, everyone go to his YouTube page.
This is an over 18s only broadcast.
I know, exactly. He's 17 and a half. So, at Malt Mentalist, Stu McIntyre says here he's the best looking man on Bruichladdich Whisky Twitter. I don't know about that, but he says...
Maybe after we've drank all of this.
He says, who supplies your bourbon casks, and do you stick to one distillery or do you experiment with different bourbons?
So we take our bourbon casks in from Speyside cooperage. And we take a variety. So in the past we maybe did buy from one specific distillery, but again with the demand of bourbon casks and the industry, basically, we were a good customer for this distillery, and then other people were offering more, so we weren't that important a customer anymore. So
not that you're better about
no.
it.
Well, I mean, it's the way it is, isn't it?
The wrong side of Adam. You'll talk about it in live tastings. And
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But so I mean, that was years ago. But actually, what we've done, and even when we were working with this distillery, we were obviously getting other supply of other bourbon casks as well. But through Speyside, we'll be sourcing from basically across America. So it could be literally every type of cask, every type of bourbon producer will get a variety of, and that's really actually quite important because it gives us a variety. So it's not like a bourbon cask is a bourbon cask is a bourbon cask. Depending on the mash bill in that bourbon, depending on how long that cask's been aged, depending on the char level that the bourbon distiller requests in their barrels, you get quite a variety, and that's just interesting. It helps build the flavour profile of what it is we're trying to do. If you, I think, probably looking back, focusing on just using one distillery to supply the bourbon barrels probably wasn't the best thing. And
wasn't geeky enough for
exactly,
it.
It wasn't geeky enough for us. So
if you do ever look at the kind of maturation profile, particularly of the Octomores, like either the 8.1 or the 9.1, and I have to stop myself from talking about products we might be releasing in the future, but particularly the 0.1 editions, you can always see what percentage of bourbon casks we've used from each distillery, can't you? So
yeah.
I don't know if we're allowed to use the brand names of them anymore, but yeah, there's a selection.
Yeah, there is, and I think it does play a part. If you just stick with one type, maybe we'll work at different age profiles and different types of spirit. So give ourselves the variety. And again, when I come to blend and pick those samples, when you look through them and taste them all, when you pick what you like, it's not just as simple as bourbon cask. It's interesting.
Do you ever feel slightly baffled by just how technical we get sometimes? Like, is it quite nice sometimes to think like there is an overarching philosophy and a bit more fluffy things to work with rather than just because if it were me, I'd be quite overwhelmed by it all.
I don't know. To be honest, no, I don't really get overwhelmed by it. I think it's just really interesting, and I think that again, having the opportunity to explore and experiment, and to again, if we just used one type of bourbon, I didn't care. It was just all bourbon anyway.
Yeah.
Then it's just not that interesting. It doesn't really suit me. I think I've been raised in making whiskey this way, so
yeah.
It is about the detail. It is about crafting something where you can understand the process and you can see the ingredients. It's not just bland. It's about really experiencing or experimenting with what it is you've got and making the best of that. And
it must be such a cool job to have, to know that your own learning is based on what you do.
Yeah.
So you're kind of given a bit more free rein to be like, oh yeah, I'd like to do this because this is interesting, and why don't we do that? And
yeah, I mean, I suppose again, I'm lucky that that's the kind of way I've been taught how to make whiskey. Is that there is that freedom, there is that expression, and that's how we learn and develop. So I think if it was just down to blending and making everything taste the same, which is I mean, as a blender, it's an incredible skill to be able to work with these different whiskies and work with different barley varieties and different casks, because there will always be natural variation anyway. To be able to blend that into a product that is the same year upon year, blend after blend, that's an incredible skill. But I would find that quite restrictive, because really what you're able to do is by tasting the spirit, nosing the spirit, filling it into different types of casks, watching it develop, watching it mature, you're able to really allow that whiskey to be what it is, and by not seeking to kind of fight against it and make it the same all the time, you end up with some really amazing whiskies. The 2010 Bare Barley, if I may put a shameless plug in for that. It was an unbelievable whiskey. All the bear barleys are good, but there's something about that vintage that just raises it above and makes you really take notice, and the flavour profile is incredible. I love being able to highlight that. I think that's a really interesting thing.
It's quite nice to know that you're not the only person that thinks that as well.
Yeah.
We've just sent them all out to review to journalists, and it has been reviewed
remarkable
very well.
spirit,
So it's nice to know that you're humble enough to say half of it's like nature and half of it's me in the warehouse.
Yeah,
It's good.
we'll see. 50-50, who knows? Yeah.
Talking of the freedom that you have to experiment, Adam, there's a few different people keep mentioning rye. Don't know if we look at that from just a rumour.
The best secret,
as far as I know. So there's a few questions about how rye whiskey could possibly fit into our future in terms of terroir and traceability, and also a couple of questions on, in fact, a lot of questions on if we ever plan to make a Port Charlotte using beer barley.
Well, just to touch on the bear barley with Port Charlotte, at the moment, no, because there is such a small amount of it grown that we would keep that. We used, I think this year, or will use this year, about 2,600 tonnes of barley or thereabouts. 40 tonnes of that is bear barley, so it's tiny.
It's tiny.
Absolutely
What's that
tiny.
in a week's production? 2 weeks?
Well, if we usually we'll do a 7-tonne mash, 10 a week. What we would do with the bear barley is 5-tonne mashes.
Yeah, okay.
8 5-tonne mashes a week. So it will last us 1 week if we stretch it out. So it's absolutely tiny.
Okay.
The bear barley, I think, from the point of view of really focusing on that variety and its flavour, by peating it, we had another complication to it. So kind of touching on some of the points you made before, if we keep it as Bruichladdich, where we don't have the influence of peat, we can focus a little bit more on the variety of barley. What was the rest of the question? Sorry, now. Rye?
Where might rye fit in with what we do in terms of provenance, traceability, terroir? What work have we done with that in that respect? And that's from Islay.
So the rye is a really interesting part of the program that we have here, the distillation program. It really wasn't born from a wish to be cool and make rye whiskey and do something no one else had ever done. It was done because when we're looking at the Islay barley project, which over the last few years has become more and more successful, and we're looking at farming practices and agriculture and our responsibility as a purchaser of malted barley to be responsible about that. We start looking at crop rotation, about land management, and the farmers in Islay are quite restricted to the crops they're able to grow, because if you're rotating, if you're growing barley one year and grass and livestock on the field the next year, you'd want to try and maybe have 5 or 6 different rotations in that field to really have the best kind of soil.
Yeah.
But for a farmer in Islay to grow carrots and then have that as a crop to export, by the time he exports that to mainland, it's already too expensive to sell. It's priced itself out in the market, so the options are limited. So as part of that kind of thing, we were looking at other cereals that we could distill. We would be then able to add into the rotation. And rye is a really interesting crop because it will be a good part of the cycle that will put back into the soil for growing barley. Mm-hmm. And of course, people make rye whiskey. We thought, well, if they can do it, we can do it. It seemed to be quite an interesting thing that.
Yes, I'm sure all the mashmen thought that at the time.
Yeah.
Were they not all cursing you?
So yeah, because working with rye, we know what it's going to be. It's completely different to barley. The way it behaves, it's the way the grain is formed. Everything's completely different, and we didn't malt it. So one of the farmers we work with, Andrew Jones, who's up at Cool Farm on the west coast. Andrew grew some rye for us as an experiment. I think he's, a young guy. He's really interested in kind of diversification and trying new things and coming along the journey with us. So he grew rye for us in 2017. We kept some Islay barley back, so we would blend Islay barley, malted Islay barley with the rye. The rye was not malted. Mm-hmm. So we had to think about how we would mash that, how we'd process that. So when looking at the research we'd done, we had an idea, we tried it, and we'd usually do a 7-ton mash of malted barley, which would take us about 9 hours. If we thought, well, we'll do a smaller mash, about 4.5 tons, with a mixture of 55% rye, 45% barley, malted barley. The very first one we did, Gordon, who's the kind of distillery manager, and myself, we were kind of doing 12-hour shifts shadowing the mashman just to make sure everything was going okay. We were learning and seeing what was happening.
Yeah.
So 10 o'clock on Sunday night, we all put the mash in. Robert was there. You and Gordon stayed on that.
Worst week of my life.
That's why he's been moved to comms.
Yeah.
So bad at mashing right.
Terrible
He's moved
mashman,
into the
yeah.
comms.
No, after the mashing right, I went, that is it, I am done.
It was quite a traumatic experience because when at 10 o'clock, mash went in, I went home, right boys, see you later, came back in at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they were still on the first water,
Oh.
I think that first mash was about 15 hours.
I think so. I think it was almost a double shift
Yeah.
for between the two shifts, where normally a mash would be anywhere between 8
But
and
Graham
9
Kirk and
hours.
I got it no bother. So.
7 hours.
Yeah, but it was.
Because it's gloopy?
Yeah,
or-
it was really gloopy. Again, there's no husk to it, so it doesn't drain the same way.
Yeah.
Again, the temperature, again, because of the we hadn't malted it, and it's so gloopy that it just didn't drain. It was just awful to work with. So it was a really interesting thing to do with that small amount we did to do these mashes and figure out a way of making that kind of Victorian equipment work to do that. And by the end of the week, we pretty much got it.
Nailed it.
We
If
pretty
anyone
much
is
got it.
interested in seeing a little bit of the how-to, Jane, who's in our comms department and is based here all year round, kind of doing the iPhone videos, she shot you guys, not
Shots. No, we felt like
she
it.
shot you guys actually mashing it. So
Yeah.
if you want to be a bit geeky afterwards, you can go and have a look on our YouTube channel about how the first rye mash went.
Yeah, it was a really interesting learning experience. It was amazing to be able to take spirit from it and be able to to run that spirit and get something. So we filled some casks in 2017. We're watching it develop, and I think how it fits into our story is it's about the barley, it's about the sustainability of growing. It's about trying to do something new, trying to do something different to
to bring the marketplace home
yeah,
for the
absolutely.
farmers. So
Yeah.
could end up with potato vodka and
Well,
any crop that they can grow, we'll distill it. That's what we said.
let's
isn't
see
it?
how we get on, shall we? Let's step one step at a time. But no, I'm pleased to say the rye it's an amazing spirit. Really interesting, obviously, to watch it develop. And Andrew's grown again for us this year, so we'll be able to distill something before Christmas and watch it develop again.
It was looking good round Coolway, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Andrew is probably the first Islay farmer to put sunflowers in his field, which was had been really nice this year to see a bit of spring barley right next to some corridors of sunflowers.
Yeah. Which is great for the wildlife. It's great for even kind of managing his soil, so that there's a strip around the outside. Again, it's just trying to kind of develop and improve all the time. So Andrew's doing some great stuff. Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's nice to see that people want to learn and progress just like we do, kind of
absolutely.
like-minded.
To be honest, I think that with all the other farmers we work with, everyone is really keen to develop. Everyone's really keen to be involved, and again, no matter their approach to making barley, it's still a very, very cool thing to be able to see. If you're growing barley, to be able to see where that has gone, the product, it's absolutely incredible. So
take our hats off to them. It's
absolutely
not an easy job.
Well, no, we had when the harvest started a couple of weeks ago, lovely weather for a few days, and then the heavens opened. It was awful, and again, you think to these guys, like the risk they take in growing for us every year, it's incredible.
Yeah.
So hats off to them indeed. Anyway, sorry to bring it back to whiskey again, but we got halfway through tasting the second ram. So if we just have a little taste of that on the palate, really malty. You get that cereal, that kind of porridge, and there's that same. Before you get the peat, you get that same kind of fruit of like stone fruit and peach. Really, really starts to come across the palate. It's quite syrupy. It's like oaty. You've got that kind of flapjack kind of thing. It's a really, really interesting flavour. And then when the peat comes through as well, you've got that lovely balance, kind of like we talked about before, the balance between the flavour from the malt and the flavour from the smoke. And the bourbon just gives it that lovely caramel, vanilla kind of creaminess in the background. It sits really, really nicely. So.
There's a lot of taste notes coming in from Twitter. A lot of burnt bitter toffee, creamy porridge oats, as you say, Adam, strawberries and cream, peach. It's very highly rated. I don't think I've seen a negative yet, which is always nice. But if you do have any, if you want to tell us it's rubbish, tell us it is. Pardon?
Even from the cynics?
No,
Or they just hate our marketing but not our liquor?
Yeah. It's all us that they hate. And
that's fair. I mean, that's traditional, is it not? To hate the comms department.
Exactly. We'll take it.
We'll keep making good whiskey, that's no matter what.
Your job is so easy, Adam.
Yeah, good, yeah.
There's a couple of questions, Adam, just about specifically the whiskey that you're talking about. What goes out when you're picking out a micro Provenance tasting? And obviously you're looking at things that are slightly different than if you're picking out one for our core range. So what goes into picking the micro Provenance bottles that you wouldn't do with something else?
So yeah, well, it's interesting because for this, because I picked it so long ago, like almost 2 years ago. I've no idea. I can't remember. No, no. I think obviously with the micro Provenance, it was first and foremost it was about we're going to focus on Port Charlotte liquid, on Islay barley. So that was really the kind of focus. So that obviously narrows down what we want to talk about. And then selecting them, I was with the 2011, because we were developing the Port Charlotte 2011, just having that single cask that really expresses the kind of the subtlety, the gentleness of how the Port Charlotte fits in with that bourbon cask. That was really why I selected the first one. With the next two being 2008, it was kind of more to focus on the kind of cask and the vintage there as well. So again, what we're trying to do with these three small bottles is focus on literally everything, so where they are in the warehouse. The cask we just tasting here was matured in warehouse 13, which is a racked warehouse. It was at the very bottom, so the influence of where that is, it's quite a cold, there's no extremes of temperature. It's quite a steady maturation. Whereas the next one we'll taste is in Dunwich warehouse, in warehouse 6, which I think comes through in the flavour. You get that earthiness, so it's really about shaping the flavour of the whiskey and looking at every single thing. With these, to be honest, there isn't a lot of liquor in the 2008. There's not a lot of whiskey to choose from, which again is quite interesting. That stuff has been left behind because it maybe will be able to mature further. Be able to mature better, but not if we drink it, obviously.
Is it true? Heard a bird say once that when the Islay barley, there's some that kind of comes in from each harvest, where some of it goes to Buchladdich and some of it goes to Port Charlotte. And for Port Charlotte, I guess in 2008, because that's the year of distillation, it all went to Port Charlotte. And then there was no 2009. Was there a slight blunder along the way?
Well, no, at some point? No, not at all. I think going back to, we forget. We're thinking that where we are in the present now, everything's dead easy. We've got a system we've developed over the years where we've been, that guys who are driving tractors, literally, like as we're talking, they're driving tractors up and down. They take it down to Octafad. Andrew Wood there will then dry it, store it, and then as we take malt in, the malt lorry will deliver for us, then go down to Octafad, pick it up, take it up to Inverness. It's a fine, finely kind of oiled machine at the moment, the way it works. But you go back 10 years, and we're still developing it, and maybe Andrew didn't have the capacity, and we had to send things up to the maltings, and then how that fits into our production schedule of how much Port Charlotte we want to make. When we make it, it maybe wasn't as streamlined at that time, and it's
streamlined. Another word you'll get sacked for.
Well, again, I think it's important to think about our production program, to counter your streamlined thing. We make this year we'll distill about 15 different spirit types.
Yeah.
We have to think about we have to get that shed emptied. Where Andrew Wood stores all that barley for us, we've got to get it emptied by the time these guys start cutting barley. So we have to have a really kind of fine-tuned production plan of when we distill, how we distill. So I'm taking this far too personally, aren't I? But it's
quite interesting because that's the stuff that you would never normally think about. Just how much logistic.
That's the thing. The planning. So we'll start planning now as the harvest coming in for roughly what we'll get next year and how that fits into the production plan. Also thinking about the guys up in Pitgaveny who've got the organic farm, about the guys who've got the bear growing up in Orkney, how that all fits into the malting schedule and what they've got to do. So it's really complicated. So go back 10 years and one thing starts to come out of line, and then we end up having to peat all that Islay barley, and then the next year. Well, we've got lots of 2008. We don't need any 2009. So, I've gone down another rabbit hole, haven't we? So,
just while you're to go completely off topic, while we're toasting absent friends of, we started with Carl. You mentioned there Pitgaveny and the regional trials. it was maybe in April or May this year. I did a bit of a road trip with our photographer Anton to go and meet our regional barley trial farmers. Is that right? I don't even know if I'm speaking correctly anymore. I've been comparing and contrasting too much. But we went up and spent some time with each of the regional barley farmers. So Tom in the Lothians, and then Colin in Aberdeenshire, and Donald Jack up in Kilcoy in the Black Isle. And very sadly, Donald, after we'd just visited, passed away. So I'd like to raise a small toast to Donald, if that's all right. Cheers.
Cheers. To Donald.
Oh, that 10-year-old's so soft when it sits for such a long time. Not that it's not soft before. Again, don't get defensive.
No, I think it's a great thing to think about again, about how these whiskies taste when you give them a bit of time to open.
I'm really surprised between these two. So the 6-year-old, I think, tastes a lot softer than the 9-year-old, which is not something that I would expect. Maybe I've just added a wee drop more water, and I don't know if people are saying that at home, but you know, you think age is the only factor, but there must be something in there.
Oh, absolutely. Well, again, I think a lot of it will come back to the cask. I think a lot of it will come where it's stored, and the relation to the spirit that has in that cask. And the great thing, this is just a perfect example of, you would assume that the older one is going to be smoother and better.
Yeah.
I say better, it's going to be smoother or whatever, but there's no kind of rules to this. Until you pull the bung and taste the whiskey that's inside, you don't know what's exactly happening. So it's just a great example again of being able to share what we'll find in the warehouses here with everybody sitting at home. So
we actually had a really good tweet about the comparison between the 6-year-old and the 9-year-old, and I've lost it. So apologies to whoever you were, because it was really, really good, and I lost it.
We'll retweet it tomorrow.
Yeah, but just very quickly before we move on, a question which I think I've probably also lost, from Duncan McLean at Duncan J McLean. He says, Adam, slightly contentious issue at the moment, maybe after recent YouTube videos, but he says, Adam, at what point are you working out the ppm value? I realise this also applies to the heavily peated Octomore.
So the ppm value comes in the malt. Ppm is a really kind of interesting topic to discuss, because ppm traditionally, until we started releasing Octomore, nobody really talked about the ppm. It's just heavily peated. But more and more, I think it's become more commonplace. And so for us, or traditionally in the industry, you would measure the ppm in the malt so that you get consistency in the malt you distill. So if a particular distillery wants, 35 ppm in their malt, then they will request that the malt still provides it at 35 ppm. So we're the same. When we talk about the ppm, it's in the malt, because as soon as you distill that barley, how you distill will give you different times of the year, you'll get different kind of levels of peat coming through. As you age it, whether it's 10 or 15 or 20 or whatever, you'll get different levels of peat as the phenols react. So it's very, very difficult to trace the exact phenols that you print on the bottle. So again, it's kind of a logistical type thing. If you're producing a whiskey, that's a 10-year-old all the time, but the ppm changes, you don't talk about the ppm and the spirit, you talk about the malt, because that's where it was all the same, and how that spirit's been created from. So
is it correct that when you're measuring the phenol levels, so you're taking account of the phenol compounds?
Yeah.
But the phenol compounds, there are many different types of phenols that give you many different types of flavour. So even though we say Port Charlotte malt is 40 ppm, can there be different compositions of different phenol types within each 40 ppm?
Yeah. So you'll see that, and again, I think that's why most people will want in their spirit consistency, or in their production methods of the barley and the malt, a consistency, so that kind of flavour profile stays. We're not particularly interested in that kind of thing, so when we start using Islay peat as opposed to peat from the Highlands for beers, again, that will give us an interesting kind of dimension on where the specific phenols come through. There's different ways of measuring that as well, so you could use colorimetric, or you could use HPLC. HPLC will give you it will basically gather every phenol, whereas I think colorimetric is a bit more narrow in its kind of band. So, so again, we'll interestingly, beds will use colorimetric for their analysis.
Yep.
We'll get the malt, and then we will also analyse by HPLC as well. So we know again what it is we're getting.
High performance liquid chromatography. If you're not
Absolutely.
familiar at home, it's very exciting.
Well, absolutely. But it's something again that it's just another aspect of making whiskey with that, particularly with Octomore. If you talk about Octomore, because we don't have a set phenol content for Octomore, essentially what's kind of being developed is that the very first distillation for Octomore was 80 ppm.
Yeah.
And so that became the benchmark or the minimum. So Octomore as a brand is something that has a ppm that will range from 80 up to 309.1 ppm.
Yeah, it was the 80, not 80.1 as well.
It was 80.2 or something like that. Yeah.
Sorry, sacked again.
It's another strike. That's it. So it's an interesting kind of thing. But again, for us, I think it's about exploration. It's about particularly the Octomore that. Initially, it was very much about pushing the boundaries and kind of developing new techniques with the malts. It was about pushing and really raising that phenol level. It wasn't about consistency and keeping the thing the same. So
yeah. So we just take what beards can give us, basically.
Yeah, as long as it's over 80. Which is a fascinating thing again to see how that peat fits in with the spirit. And year upon year, each release of Octomore we do, you've got a variation. So it's interesting that the 309.1 has been the highest we've managed to do. In the Islay barley, and the Islay barley this year was 307.
Oh,
So was it last year? Sorry, it was 307. So we got close.
Interesting.
But it's again the balance in it is quite interesting. And
so that'll take about 5 years to come out.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Set the countdown clock now.
Absolutely.
Rob out.
Yeah, absolutely. So.
Should we move on to 3?
Should we? I've poured the third dram, just trying to be efficient in our time.
Streamlined.
It was very streamlined. So the third dram. Of the MP series is again a 2008 second fill reef salt. So again, you look at it, you see that kind of richer colour, French oak as opposed to American oak for the first two. Second fill again. So the reef salt is kind of region in the south of France where they produce fortified wine. So it's quite sweet. It's almost like a sherry style, depending on the variety we use. But second fill, you're going to get more oak and less influence from the spirit of the wine that was in there before, and that's an interesting aspect for us to blend with, because you're not getting too strong or too dominant a flavour. It's the oak that's really working nicely, and French oak, depending on the toast, is really, really expressive and can give us really different flavour profiles from the American oak, which is maybe more traditional. So a really interesting ingredient to work with in the maturation. So yeah, nosing that again, you get that kind of pressure off at 62.6% alcohol. So again, high strength. I mean, one thing we've not really kind of looked at too much is the way it sits in the glass, but particularly with this one, it really, really coats the glass. Again, because it's that high strength, you're getting it at its natural form. You really see the viscosity of it. Now, on the nose, completely different to anything we've had before. One big thing for me is that this is like a ginger cake. It's got that lovely kind of sweetness. It's got that spicy kind of ginger. So again, it's quite the cask probably was quite heavily toasted to kind of bring out that spiciness. You get this lovely marine kind of ozone note as well, which is really nice, and like a cherry pie. You get this kind of lovely sweet, kind of rich, kind of dark fruit.
I definitely get the ginger. At first, I'm always like, well, if it's a wine cask, it's going to be quite tannic. Because, you get a lot of influence from the European oak in there. But I don't know if that's whether I just think about European oak and then I smell what my brain thinks it knows or not.
There's maybe a bit of that, but I think that spiciness is really a lovely feature of that. Because again, it's the oak that's giving more. It's not the reef salt wine that was in the cask that's giving too much influence. Oh. So, on the palate, it feels a bit drier.
Yeah.
But then there's this lovely thing where you get that kind of heat, and then bang, that fruit comes through.
Yeah.
It really, really comes through across the palate.
So many layers in it.
Really, really interesting that. Then you get the smoke. I mean, there's just something really, really nice about that. Very, very different. I think it's a really nice whiskey for blending with. There's almost a bitterness to it now. Coming towards the end, there's I don't know if it's the smoke or what, but you get this. It's not quite tannic, but you get almost a kind of a bitterness to it, which I think is quite nice. The peat on the finish is like quite a dusty peat. It's not. It's quite dry. For those of you who've ever been, getting peat in off the moss when you get that the peat calf, I'm sure. Yeah, you all do this every summer, like we do. But when we were kids, that was how we spent our summer, was gathering peats in the moss. It was great fun.
I didn't.
No, I did. I did. Yeah. But you get that kind of dusty peat, that kind of just dry earth, and that's a note that comes through there.
The two over here are giggling like school children in the back.
I can only
Too
apologise.
Too much whiskey.
Because you said earlier that it was an adult show. Callum, my son, who's 10, has changed his avatar and photoshopped on a beard and big bushy eyebrows. So welcome back, Callum.
Nice one, Callum. You're definitely old enough to enjoy this.
100 times funnier than your father.
Yeah.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So
Reef salt, very common.
reef salt, yeah. So yeah, interesting cask, and just to kind of come back to one of the things you kind of talked about before, Ab, was like why we selected these two. It was part of what this was, these are individual casks, but when I'm blending, it's about how they work together. So if everyone has a little bit of these left together, if you take the second dram, which in this glass here, which is the kind of 8-year-old bourbon cask, and you add probably that much, just a little bit of that reef salt into it, they work beautifully together. So individually, they don't work as perfect. These are amazing single casks. We can appreciate what they are together, but by adding a little bit of that reef salt in, you get a lovely combination. So you get a little bit of that spiciness coming through. You got a lot more fruit coming from the bourbon.
That's interesting.
A little splash of water in there as well.
I've added a wee bit of water already, but I think they do all stand alone. They're all individually interesting. I'm assuming that's again why you've chosen them.
For sure, absolutely. But this was one of the reasons these two were together, is that actually in the 2008 Islay barley, these were both components of that.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting, again, just when I was selecting these, to think if we did a bit of kind of blending and look at how the casks work together. These two, I think, really, really work together. You get that lovely spiciness. Get that lovely peach. That lovely kind of nectarine, that ripe peach note.
Very interesting.
Is that a first for a micro Provenance tasting?
Blending on the spot. Well, it's interesting because if anybody at home thinks it didn't work, then you didn't blend it right. But no, I mean, it's just a little thing I thought would be interesting to do, because we're focusing on these casks, and blending is such an important part. A single cask that is got the balance and is good enough to be a single cask is quite a rare thing. Each cask is expressing different aspects of its character. Some really suit being, components to a blend, and I think these two really do. But when you blend them together, you get something that is kind of better than they are individually, and that's what blending is.
The sum of its parts.
Absolutely. So even when we talk about these kind of single vintage, single kind of farm releases, there's still an element of blending, of working on those flavours to create something that shows everything off in its best light, which I think is. I just want to make sure that I don't get replaced. You
don't know if you can replace Jim McEwen. I'm sure you can replace Adam.
Well, yeah, thank you, Christy. Thank you. No, I think it's an important thing that it's not just about just taking one field, distilling it one way and putting it to cask and then bottling it, and that's it. There's still a lot to it.
So what you're saying is, really, when you think about it, that it's not just about the terroir on its own and standing alone. There is still a bit of human interaction, a bit of a human element that you have to come in and craft it a bit yourself.
Absolutely, but whiskey doesn't happen without the interaction of people. If you just left barley there, nothing would happen to it. So there is that interaction with what we do. Yeah. I think it's really interesting when you think about what we do at Bruichladdich in this Victorian distillery, where we're making whiskey by hand.
Yeah.
It's the skill, it's the intuition, it's the involvement. I mean, Robert will talk about this. If you can remember his days mashing, you're looking slightly confused there, but just when you think about different, when you think about the different, like the Colin Tooks barley from Aberdeen every year, you get that Aberdeen barley in the mash tun that's different every year. You have to react differently, think differently about how you use it, how you mill it. And I think there's this amazing human interaction in what it is we're doing that is a big part all the way through the story. Whiskey just doesn't happen by itself.
it was funny with the regional trials mashing because when you'd bring in the Aberdeen, Lothian and Black Isle separately, although they were completely different from each other, while we had it in the mash tun, it behaved differently. The wort tasted differently. It had different aspects. You could, when you took notes in your book, to look back the following year, they were consistent. So you could, by the end of the fourth year probably of me doing the regional trials, I could probably tell you what barley we were mashing by how it was behaving in the mash tun, because although they were all different from each other, they seemed to just behave that same way every year in the mash tun. Slight differences, but the fundamentals would be the same. So we always would look forward. Well, I would always look forward to the Aberdeen more than other ones because it was the easiest to do. So as was my style. But it was just the way it behaved. It always had good drainage. It always came off well. You generally get good results from it. And it was it was funny the way it worked out. But yeah, it was always interesting.
It is funny when you talk about terroir, and it is this like almost otherworldly thing for us. If you're not used to being in France and you're not used to working with grapes and you're not in that world, it can seem a bit scary. And then for me it was really simple when again went to visit Colin in Aberdeen, and you just see how different Scotland is from the east to the west coast, and you kind of underestimate it a bit because you just think, oh well, it's one country, so it can't, I mean, we're not Canada, it's not going to be vastly different from the east to the west. But even the size of Colin's fields were huge. You could run a combine through it, no bother. I mean, you can see why people grow on the east coast and why people here haven't until we had to give them the, we'd really like you to do this. But when you see, James Brown trying to harvest at Octomore, and Neil's basically navigating the combine around rocks, and Scott's had to engineer the combine with extra wheels to make it float, basically. I think I've understood that correctly.
Yeah, the ground's that soft.
So Andrew had combined recently, and it was just massive big chunks out of the field.
Yeah.
So it's totally different, even from, if you're just talking about the challenges that people face, there's a complete difference. Is that not part of the kind of tapestry of it all?
Yeah. And I suppose that's something that nobody ever thinks about or nobody ever focuses on. But again, because we have an involvement right the way through, then and you've been up and visited the farmers and been on the farms and seen what they look like. So of course that becomes part of the story because we recognise that. But I think, again, it's evolving all the time. And I think when we talk about the regional trials, that's kind of what internally we've always called it. But I don't think it really does justice to what we're doing, because we're not just taking barley from a region.
Yeah.
It's from a specific farm. It's from a really, really kind of tiny location that really influences that barley. It's not just a generic kind of thing. It's a really specific single farm expression that we're distilling.
Yeah.
And again, we can see the differences in the farms and the difference in the people and how they farm, and we taste the difference in the spirit, and it all lines up and it all makes sense.
Does it?
It really does. To me, anyway. To me.
No, I mean, it makes sense to me that we would explore it, but I don't know. Yeah. Does it always line up and make sense?
Yeah.
And I suppose if Robert's saying, it mashes the same way, kind of predictably, eventually you get to a point where you do start to have an understanding for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. It's a fascinating thing to do, but only by doing that experiment and putting the time in, and following everything down to the farmers and working with them and the maltsters, and what we do here. I think it's only then when you go down to that level of detail and you taste the spirit, and you build up over years and years, and you taste the difference between Aberdeen, the Lothians, or Colin, Tom and Donald's farms, their barley. When you taste the difference there, but then you taste Colin Turk's the different vintages from 2014 through 2019.
Yeah.
Only by doing that and by spending the time on it do you build up the knowledge. So
interesting. Can't wait to taste it. Yeah.
Soon, very soon.
Okay, soon. How are we for time? Is everyone falling asleep at home? Are we still getting questions?
There's plenty of questions coming in.
Should we have some more questions?
Jane's maybe we should have a few to finish up on, I suppose. So Kevin Grant, he's very complimentary of the third dram tonight, and he's asking when we're going to release it and how much it's going to cost. I tried to tell him that it's not going to happen, but he's not given up. Adam, thoughts?
Well, we've bottled that cask now, we're drinking it, so we can't really do that one again. At
I hope I've got that right. I hope I've not made an arse of it. Asks, is there a standard length of time that you would use in a first fill of any cask before it is used for a second fill, or do they all have their own lifespan?
To be honest, yeah, they all have their own lifespans. It's all quite how long is a piece of string, because yeah, there's no one rule fits everything here. So there could be some that would have been 10 or 15 years that have been first fill. There'll be some that will be a few months. I think for what we tend to do with like using a second fill cask or even a third fill cask is when you empty that cask and you see the impact that it's had on the spirit, you then make a judgment on that cask as to what you would do with it next. So you just have to take it case by case. You know?
So are you doing that all individually, or have you trained up the boys in the warehouse to give you a kind of
so I think the boys in the warehouse certainly do a bit of that. It could just be, they'll. I mean, I suppose it's how I kind of started as well. And I've said to the guys, you've got to taste, you've got to, pay attention to what it is you're doing, so that you can, develop and learn and be, better at what you do. It's what I did when Jim was teaching me things. You would, have a glass, taste that, dip your finger in, have a taste, look at the colour, look at the cask, and you build up the knowledge. And I think the good thing is the boys are all really interested in what it is they do. So naturally it happens they want to know more. So
I'm sure Jay doesn't take much convincing.
No, absolutely not. No, it's pint glass that he has there for sampling. Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So two slightly juicy ones maybe to finish. A couple of questions on when we're going to see a Port Charlotte Black Art.
A Port Charlotte Black Art. Don't know. I think we've done. I'm sure I did one at the masterclass a couple of years ago. Was a Port Charlotte Black Art, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So in the background, we're thinking about these kind of things and have something on the go.
Yeah, if you're in Adam's sample room, it's Port Charlotte Black Art.
Yeah, pretty much. But so at the moment, I think Port Charlotte's an interesting thing because it's. It's a beautiful spirit, and we're kind of developing it. We're still a young single malt. We're still looking at what we do. So maybe in the future one day, but at the moment, we'll kind of stick to what we're doing, I think.
And again, somebody asked this really good question. I forget who you are, so sorry I can't give you credit, but we'll retweet it later. What's your favourite Port Charlotte that you've been involved in making, and is it the MRC? One. The
MRC01 is an amazing whiskey, really, really interesting whiskey, and I've been tasting that at kind of festivals and stuff with people that get out and about and get some really, really lovely comments back about it. But for me, the best of the Port Charlottes is this 10-year-old, because obviously with kind of rejuvenating Port Charlotte, that's not even the right word, but in kind of developing Port Charlotte again. We did have a multi-vintage Port Charlotte Scottish barley, which was a really, really good expression, a beautiful expression. There's a lot of variety, and they're able to play a lot of tunes with the different casks and different vintages there. But watching Port Charlotte develop over the years, I've kind of felt that as it's a kind of 10 years old, we start to just hit this amazing peak, and being able to kind of what should we do with Port Charlotte? What do you want to do with the liquid? Having that free reign to go and choose something and then develop the 10. We don't have a lot of it, so it's not as if we can sell it all over the place. It's quite limited. But again, that was quite nice for me to be able to say, look, that's the whiskey I want to release. That's what I believe in. That's what I think is the right balance of flavour, and then that's what we do. There's no pressure to do anything kind of commercially that will sell more whiskey. It's about really making the best whiskey we can, because ultimately that's what represents us and what we do. So creating that was a fantastic kind of opportunity for me, and so I have a really nice connection to it, a personal connection to it, and I just love it as a drink. I think that's the best I suppose we can say about it, is that we make whiskey that is something we absolutely enjoy drinking. It's delicious, it's amazing whiskey, so let's do it.
I know that nobody asked for my opinion, but I'm going to give it anyway. I find that with the current Port Charlotte range, the 10, the Islay barley, and the cask specials that we've got, it's just the versatility with each of them that I find quite impressive. Like, I do enjoy each of them individually, but it's the fact that, obviously that's how we've done it, but you want to showcase the differences, but it is about, they're all very enjoyable for very different reasons. It's not monotonous, it's not standard, it's just like, this evening I feel like this, or this evening I feel like this. So yeah, there's definitely a versatility to Port Charlotte that's quite stunning.
Absolutely, I think with the range we've got there, there's different conversations you can have, different moods you can kind of get into with these different whiskies. I think that's, again, it's the versatility of it, because we're still exploring the spirit, we're still developing, and the cask specials. You know, maybe to touch back on the Black Art question, the cask specials are fantastic because you get to play amazing tunes with these casks and see how they develop, and then maybe that informs you in years to come of which casks you'd use to make a Black Art. You know, who knows?
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day. Yeah.
There's we'll just mention there's a few people who are tuning in around the world that I think deserve a little mention. So the Water of Life team are in the edit suite in Nepal. So I'm not sure what. What does not say Nepal? I thought it said Nepal.
There's someone else in Nepal.
Oh, sorry.
Not in Nepal.
Do you want to try? Can you pronounce that name?
Guav Gurung.
You're in Nepal. The Water Life people, you're definitely not in Nepal. But thanks, anyway. You're somewhere in the United States, I think.
I promised to put
So yeah, I mean, it's late. So
someone from Nepal tuning in. Thank you very
Yeah,
much. That's dedication. I imagine it's quite late for you.
I don't think his name is Paul, but he's in Nepal. Thanks to you for tuning in. Ochi, that's probably pronounced wrong as well, in Japan. And Trent, our very own Trent Simpson, and his team in San Francisco. So thank you to you guys as well.
Well done, team.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah.
Someone's listening to us at
Someone
least.
is. Yeah, well done for staying up, Trent, or getting up early, or whatever time of day it is over there. Yeah, okay.
Come on now, you're a world traveller now.
Yeah, I get lost going home, so.
Your holiday to Portnahaven each year.
Exactly, exotic travel. Good. So, we've got some good questions. Are we
we can stay here all night and ask questions if you
well,
want.
let's let you pick one more good one, Rab,
Right,
and
one
then
more-
we
one
better
more
let
good
everyone
one,
get to
okay.
bed.
I'll go into, Jane sent me a few here, so I'm going to pick one of Jane. So if it's rubbish, she can take the blame for it. Just speak among yourselves. Oh yes, okay. I really like this one. Sorry, don't speak among yourselves. So I think it's J Rose with a 5 instead of an S. Will we see a micro-provenance series in the future, but experimenting with different spirit cuts or fermentation methods or other parts of the production process as opposed to just cask and peat and
That's a very interesting question. I think, well, do you know, I mean, it's something with the MP that we're kind of, we haven't done one for a while, as obviously we talked about at the beginning. But I think, it's a great tool to be able to discuss lots of different things. So maybe, we could look at, putting a vote out for what we'll do for the next one, or a topic to cover for the next one, because, I mean, the good thing about what we do at Bruichladdich is there's nothing to hide. We're going to talk about anything. This hour's tasting, which has gone on for about 3 hours now, we've got a lot to talk about, and we're open and we're transparent. So I think maybe we could do something like that, where if there's a particular topic, everybody wants to discuss or talk about or raise, then we could maybe do that for a
crowdsourced MP.
Yeah.
If anyone does want to suggest, you can do it on our social media channels, or also if you write to newsroom@bruichladdich.com, we'll collect some feedback and we'll take your notes on board for the next time.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Brilliant. Should we wrap up?
Let's do that. Well, listen.
Do you want to pick a favourite, or?
I can't. It's like picking your favourite child,
Oh, surely you have one.
Absolutely not. No, I love my children both equally. So I think to pick a favourite of those three, I don't think would be fair. I think they're all completely individual whiskies. They all express certain individual characteristics. I think that's the lovely thing about what we're able to do, as I say.
Nice.
So, Christy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
Roberts, Jane, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to...
Where else we'd rather be on a Friday evening?
I can't think of anyone
Certainly
else,
don't have a life, so I'd rather be here.
Exactly, me too. So, well, listen, thank you everybody for spending time with us and sending in questions, and hopefully you've managed to stay to the end of this. Everyone who started is still with us now. Until the next one.
Cheers.
Flanger. Cheers.